So number one for me, above anything else, is sustainability. Is the business sustainable? Is it going to be here arguably 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now? You're getting a 10-year SBA loan.
There's an entire generation of Americans who no longer care about prestige, titles, work travel, fancy offices, and lunches. Welcome to Mundane Millionaires, a podcast for this generation of small business owners who want to set their ego aside and focus on what matters: family, community, quality of life, and cash flows. In each episode, Eric Pacifici and Kevin Henderson uncover what it takes to get a little money in the bank, control your time, and invest in building great families and lives. Let's get started.
Welcome back, Mundane Millionaires. We just had an incredible conversation with Bruce Marks, SBA lender at First Bank of the Lake, experienced entrepreneur, somebody that we both know, pretty well at this point. We've been working with Bruce and for some time in the business buying realm. What did you think of the interview?
Bruce is he's such a thoughtful commentator as a lender about the puts and takes of business buying. I thought it was incredibly insightful in kind of the mentality of a lender, what lenders are looking at, because, and we hit this multiple times throughout the interview. A buyer is looking at and analyzing a business. A lender is analyzing a business and a buyer. That I think a lot of business buyers don't fully appreciate. And we talk about this, the importance of kind of selling your personal brand and selling yourself as a buyer, not just to the seller, but to the lender, to the broker. Just a lot of really great, thoughtful commentary about what a lender like Bruce is looking at for someone that wants to be successful in this process.
Yeah, for sure. And he's done it over 1,200 times. Last count, I think he's had over 1,200
mind-blowing
business closings. In addition to having been an entrepreneur for over a decade prior to that, and then also, being now a published author, being somebody who's very prolific on social media. He's a very interesting guy. I loved hearing from him about what he thinks the qualities of a good business are, what the qualities of a good buyer are, what businesses he hates. The risk, right? Business buying and entrepreneurship has risks, and he tells a really potent story that brings that home. He also has a fear of and a hatred for kayaks, and we dive into that. We have some fun with that. So
we'll invite on a psychologist in the future to talk about
for sure.
Yeah, a lot of people that know Bruce from the app formerly known as Twitter know Bruce for his War Story Saturdays, where he posts stories from his years of lending experience. And it does bear noting at the outset that the sobering story you refer to does involve, unfortunately, someone taking their life. For those of you listeners, we'll interrupt the podcast again at that point, but just to warn you, as a point of sensitivity, that topic does come up during today's podcast episode.
Yeah, very important point, Kevin. There's some sensitive things that we talk about, but it is a potent representation of the risks in entrepreneurship and life. I think that's
Absolutely.
Something that we need to talk about a lot. We need to talk about we can talk about the reward all day long. That's easy. We need to talk about the risks, and we do that. But there's also just a ton of value, a ton of learning, a ton of really interesting Bruceisms in here. Bruce is, he's known for saying things like, he's got some pretty notorious expressions that are put on t-shirts and things like that. So I think people are going to have fun listening to Bruce. I know I had a ton of fun talking to him.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure talking to him. He's a huge resource for the community. So enjoy today's episode with Bruce Marks, one of the most popular SBA 7A lenders in the small business self-funded search space.
Bruce Marks. Bruce, welcome to the pod. This is a fun episode for Kevin and I, because Kevin and I are candidly big fans of yours, being
Thank you.
Somebody who's been in our space for a long time, somebody who's incredibly well respected in the search community, the godfather of search, as you would probably describe yourself. I'm kidding. So, Bruce, acquisition entrepreneurship as well as anybody, I think, right? You've been, how many years have you been originating loans?
Originating loans, 36, 7 years.
36. And you moved into like the true search fund, self-funded search world, and you were one of the first. In what year?
2015.
15. Okay. So
Yep.
you saw the way, because that was
that's when I made my first search fund loan. I was introduced to the model from a guy out of Harvard, Adam Barker, who called me up. I was working at the Bancorp at that point in time and said, "Hey, have this transaction. Do you know the model?" I said, "No." And he said, "Let me explain it to you." And after hearing about the model and understanding it, I just said, "This is the future. This is the way to go." Ultimately, I did not even make a loan to Adam because I had suggested that the transaction he was actually looking at was a little bit too big for where I felt would be a good starting place for him. And he took my advice and he bought a smaller business and has become extremely successful. But he first introduced me to the search fund space. And after I made my first loan to a Harvard graduate, I never have done really anything since.
And so that was a full 2 years, Bruce, before the HBR guide that I always refer to, the HBR guide to buying a small business, which is kind of the seminal piece in the search fund space, was even written. So this was, you were out ahead of the trend. And for the audience's benefit, Kevin, do you want to tell everybody what a search fund is for the two people that are listening to this that don't know what it is?
You mean the two people that are listening to this? I think is what you meant. You meant to say.
Exactly. I know the two people are Kevin and Eric. So, okay, great.
that's right.
Do you want to tell our moms? Tell our moms what a search fund is, Kevin.
Thanks, Mom, for giving us another download. No, it's a great point. I think because we talk so much in the self-funded search space, the search fund model, also known as traditional search, is a little bit different than self-funded, where you actually go out before your search and kind of market yourself to raise a fund that supports you financially through your search process. And then that fund then becomes your principal financial backers when you find a business. It tends to be larger EBITDA businesses. So usually a traditional search or search fund model is going to be your 1 to 2 million up EBITDA. That doesn't lend itself very well to the smaller self-funded search size. But yeah, it's a little bit of a different animal than self-funded search, right, Bruce? I mean, do you still do a lot of traditional search? Or I know we do a lot of self-funded with you.
And was that traditional search, Bruce, that you were referring to, or was it self-funded search?
No, it was self-funded, because in traditional search, typically the fund part of the transaction, the investors behind it, are going to own the majority, and they don't want to provide a PG. And so typically on a traditional search, they're not going to go SBA because they're not going to guarantee. And the searcher himself will own 20 to 25% of the business. Maybe with promote, they might earn a little bit more. But for the most part, they're going to have the lower equity stake, and the investors are going to have the higher stake. And one thing I would add, Kevin, is that just with the traditional search, they're paying the searcher generally a salary, right? During those year or two, generally it's a couple of years, right? To support
it's a financially supported search where the searcher, they make it their full-time job,
right? They make it their full-time job. And I remember a very interesting case way back when I started was two brothers who had come out of the traditional search because they weren't successful finding a correct target for the investors. And they said, you know what, unfortunately their dad had passed away and left them some money. And they said, we still don't want to give up on the model, but we're going to do it ourselves. And we're going to go from traditional to self-funded, because we think that there are some good targets, and we presented to our investors some good targets. They just didn't bite, so
they didn't like them.
They didn't like it. So it's interesting how you can, just because you start in one, whether it's traditional or self-funded, that doesn't mean you're just stuck there. You can cross over. You can go from, hey, I'm a self-funded, and not find one and say, whoops, I need to now get a job and I need some money and I need the help of people that can support me, and go to the traditional route when you started it, and vice versa. It just happens that way.
Well, and it's also an interesting point because it highlights the fact that no model really is the end all be all, right?
Cool.
They all come with their trade-offs, and for all the virtues of the search fund model, you can do larger deals, right? Things like that. It comes at a trade-off, right? You're much more beholden to your equity investors than you are, say, in self-funded, where they're more minority investors.
That's right.
It's still very much driven by the searcher. That may be very appealing to you as a searcher, but there's a trade-off. You can't do a $20 million deal as a self-funded search unless you just have a massive amount of family wealth behind you or something, for example. Yeah. So it's a great highlight also of kind of, as you look at these models, you have to pick and choose what are the puts and takes, what are you really after, what can you bring to the table, and that may drive you one way or the other.
But let's give some quick context though, right? Because traditional search is pretty much reserved for a very elite level of MBA. You're graduating from Harvard, Stanford, Chicago, because it's a very niche cohort of investors that are willing to take that level of risk. And so 99% of business buyers are self-funded searchers. Even with investors, they're self-funded versus traditional searchers. So that's kind of the context for the audience. And they're different animals, because the traditional search, the average buyer, it's more of a, call it a glorified CEO. And I don't mean that as a pejorative, but I think the way the economics really work out is you take 8% of the business to start. And if you hit certain hurdles, you could take as much as 24%. Which ultimately, if you buy a large business, which you need to do for traditional search, and you have an exit and you get to that 24%, it's pretty life-changing money. And it's great experience also in what a lot of people, because there's a lot of criticism. Why would you go the traditional route and own 8% when you could go the self-funded route and own as much as 100, or even take investors and own 80% plus? And the answer is, well, the traditional route is a very well-worn path, right? There is a group of investors, and you've got an enormous amount of support, and a great path would be do the traditional route, spend a couple years cutting your teeth, take whatever capital you earn from that, roll it into a self-funded search afterwards. So that's a really good way to think about it, I think. But I interrupted you, Bruce. Keep saying what you were saying, because it was good stuff.
It's interesting because in the space that I play, I see the deal sizes that I'm looking at now are getting just bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm in now 2 self-funded search transactions. One is 10 million and the other is 13. Yeah. That's big for self-funded search. I mean, you're talking EBITDA on one is 2 million and EBITDA on the other one is 3 million.
Yeah.
Traditionally, that's more, when you talk to the private equity worlds, or you talk to the small family office, and, you're having conversations with those guys who are like, yeah, we're looking for EBITDA 2 to 10, right? I mean, that's the pretty standard. It's common. Oh, how do you separate yourself? Oh, we're industry agnostic. Well, so isn't the guy standing next to you, but okay, let's pretend you're unique, right? But it's like, and I laugh because it's the same story, but yet they're unique. But it's interesting how there's so much momentum in this space that the deals that I'm seeing, we're doing more and more pari passu loans as a result of just this model growing and more investors wanting to be involved.
Bruce, are they genius or are they crazy? Right? Because I look at that. No, I'm serious. I look at that and I go,
don't name names. Don't name names.
I mean, but think about it. So you go out and you buy, you bring equity to the table, you bring investors, you buy a business that has, $2+ million in EBITDA, and you're buying it for $10 to $14 million. That's a substantial organization. You've got oftentimes north of 30, north of 50 employees that you're taking over. That seems like an enormous endeavor. But the moment you close that deal, I mean, literally the moment that deal funds, you're a millionaire. You're a millionaire, right? Your equity value in that deal. And somebody call me out of that, because my math, me and math, Bruce. But
you are a $983,000 heir.
I mean, effectively, the moment that deal funds, you've basically solidified forever, unless it blows up astronomically, which is rare, but it
Rare.
happens. But if it's assuming you're in the 95% plus of transactions, it's probably higher than that actually on deals of that size. Assuming you're in the, significant majority, the moment that deal funds, you're in a different economic bracket than 99.9% of people forever. So I want to say you're a genius on the one hand, but I also want to say you're crazy for buying a massive organization as an outsider. What's your perspective on that?
I think,
And be honest, because I know you're conflicted.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. But I would tell you that that's why people buy a business. They go in with the notion of, I can buy this, I can build it, I can grow it, and I can sell it. And if, as long as I do a good job, to your point, let's say you buy a $10 million business and you get an SBA loan, and 10 years from now, it's even at the same value, but you paid off your SBA loan. Now you got a business worth $10 million. I mean, even if you didn't.
Even in a no growth scenario.
Even in a no growth scenario. So if you own 80% of that, guess what? $8 million for, as you said, Eric, 99.9% of the people, that's life changing.
Yep.
That is life changing. Yeah. And so in speaking with searchers every day that I do, right? So I speak to, on average, 3 searchers a day, on average, 3 new searchers a day, consistently. And the story is very similar. It's the dream of ownership. It's the dream of becoming that millionaire. It's the dream of not having to work for the man. It's the dream of not having a W-2. It's the dream of all the things that, that you guys yourself took, right? Like, okay, you were at a big law firm. Everybody knows the story. You guys are so well known. And yet here you are, owners of SMB. So you're in the same boat. You took that same risk. You understand it. You're growing a tremendous organization, right? When we started, I remember when we were sitting and you were introducing, this is our model. It was the 2 of you. And you're like,
I think we were 2 weeks into launch.
I know it. I swear to God.
And we started a business that has enormous amount of personal goodwill. And what we did, frankly, is a lot different than somebody who goes out and buys a significant, I'll call it a real business.
No, but, and I'm not, and yes, the model is different because you started a business, but the premise is the same. The premise today is the same.
Yeah,
to build
for sure. What are the? But let's back up though. One, I want to know. So, because we're making it sound like a layup, right? And it's not. So, how do I get there? I'm in a W-2. I've got some skill set, right? I've been working for a couple years. I got a little bit of money saved up, not a ton. Say $100,000 saved up. I love the idea of buying a business, but I don't know where to start, Bruce. You've closed now over 1,200 transactions the last time I saw a number stated, which is a lot. And frankly, I think you see them earlier than we do. Kevin and I pretty much see them at LOI. What's your perspective? How do I get from, I hate my W-2, I want to buy a business, to actually going and doing what we just described?
So I remember a client reaching out to me and he really had no experience. He said, this is the space that I'm in. I'm really good at what it is that I do. I believe I would be an excellent business owner. I've identified a target. Now what? And a lot of times that's what happens, truthfully. And they'll reach out to, they're following SMB Twitter. I don't know. What do we call it now? SMBX or something? I don't even know.
I think we call it a disaster would be a good way to characterize it.
Are we not tweeting anymore? We're Xing? What is it that we're doing, right? Like it's like confusing. So people will reach out and they'll say, I have an interest in a business to buy. It happened this week. And said, okay, do you have legal representation? Are you ready to submit an LOI? No, do you have a template for that? And, support for you guys, I'm saying, hey, you guys need to reach out to SMB Law and they'll provide you with one, right? They'll provide you with a template. And then, so normally then that's where a lot of what I'm doing, what you guys are doing, what maybe their deal team is doing, if they're hiring somebody to do the Q of E, they're giving them advice. What they do know is that they want to own a business. What they do know is that they feel they have the skill sets to buy it and grow it, make it their own, and hopefully sell it at a much higher price down the road. But there's a ton of people who can provide the expertise to help them all along the way to get there.
So just to continue on that vein, and particularly because I want to contrast it to what you said with these increasingly larger deals. So someone gets to that point, they've got your kind of typical SBA 7A loan backed acquisition on the line, right? $3-4 million. What does that look like in terms of how they're structuring that deal? And then contrast that with those bigger deals, because I'm really fascinated and curious how people are pushing that envelope of the self-funded search space, knowing that the SBA loans cap out at $5 million. Like, how do you do a 10, 12, $13 million deal that involves an SBA loan and have it still make sense? So walk us through the structure and then contrast those bigger ones.
So, like I said, there's a lot of people out there that are providing advice. So when somebody comes to me, we talk about the opportunity. I talk to them about why it's the right one. We go through the deal economics to make sure that it makes sense, that it's going to pencil out, that based upon how much money they have, how much money they're going to have to raise. A lot of people are, well, I only have 5%. Okay, well, then you're going to need a 5% seller note on standby, right? So and then you start walking through the deal dynamics and then ultimately saying, okay, it looks like it's a deal that's going to work. Engage an attorney firm, engage a QV, going through all of that process. And it's amazing, I find, that the people that are reaching out, they are doing their homework. They're doing their due diligence. They're learning about the SBA loan program. 10 years ago, search fund model SBA were, if you went to a business broker and said, hey, I'm a searcher, the business brokerage community wouldn't even speak to you. Like, they wouldn't even talk to you back then, Kevin. They would just go, no, show me your personal financial statement. If you don't have 15% to put down, we're not even going to show you the business.
Okay.
Right? Well, today, that's not the way it works. You know that because you close deals for searchers all the time, and you see
why is that, Bruce? Is it just more familiarity with searchers, or is it a change in the supply of searchers? Like, why are they now more receptive?
Access to capital is there today for somebody. Yeah, I mean, Eric, because you can take a searcher who comes in and says, I'm buying a $2 million business. We're going to put down 5%, which is $100,000. I've got $25,000 and I'm going to raise $75,000. And then the seller holds a 5% standby and that deal gets done. So you don't need the personal financial statement with a ton of money anymore. That's the way it works.
Yeah, that's always one of the questions that we get is, how do I get past this lip? Because you'll still get that question, right? And they'll want to know that you have the money. And how do you do that? Because the investors oftentimes soft commitments, or they're not committed yet until they know what the business is. So it's a little bit of a dance. What's your advice to searchers on that point?
So it's educating the business brokers. And there's a lot of business brokers that are aware of the model, and there are some that are not. And so if I'm a searcher, I'm saying to the business broker, look, you want to know that I have, if you're asking me for a PFS or you're asking me if I can pull the trigger, you want to know that I can put down $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000, right? But let me tell you about what I bring to the table, why I'm the best guy to buy this business. And if you can convince him, obviously, like you're doing with your investors, you're convincing them that they should support you and they should back you and they'll give you money. And it's not,
We talk about
this all
the time.
Right.
We talk about this all the time, how in the business buying process, it's not just the seller selling, it's the buyer selling, right?
Right.
They're selling themselves to the banker.
That's right.
To the seller, to the seller's broker, just as much as the seller is selling the business back to the buyer. It's a underappreciated nuance, I think, of this space. How important, people go into this with a buyer's mentality, how important the seller's mentality really is for a business buyer.
And you hit on, to me, the key, Kevin, because what the business broker is afraid of is if I bring 10 buyers to my seller and none of them pulled the trigger, what's that say for me?
Yeah.
At some point, the seller's going to go, did I hire the right guy to represent me in my business? So you have to, this is a little sidebar, but I remember doing an exercise. It was called Walk in My Shoes. And this is important for people to hear. So, you get a person who's got a size 10 and a person who's got a size 5, and you trade shoes. You really don't know what the other person is feeling until you try to put that shoe on, right?
Yes.
The shoe's not going to fit. It's too tight. It's too small. It's got heels, whatever the case may be. So oftentimes it would be awesome if the buyer just stepped back and said, to your point, Kevin, I have to sell me and the opportunity, because the seller, if he cares about his employees, cares about who he sells the business to.
Yeah.
I had an interesting call with a buyer the other day. He's looking to buy a business. It's in a small little town in the Midwest. And I said to him, if you're successful buying this business, imagine what day one looks like. Like, you're going to have all the people in the community at your business.
Yeah.
Because everybody knows everybody. It's a small community. And you're going to walk down that street literally going, oh, he's the new buyer of XYZ company, right? Like, that's super meaningful. And if you're the seller and your name is on that building, there's just so much to it. So it's not, in my mind, it's going and educating the business broker. It's not so much about how much money the searcher has, because as I've tweeted a number of times over and over and over again on War Story Saturday, Eric, as you've tweeted, Kevin, I know you have, and all the other people that are huge in that community, it's not about how much money the searcher has that's getting the deal done. That's not the way it works.
That's really good advice, Bruce. Somebody asked me today, like, why are business brokers so terrible, right? And my answer was, well, they are terrible, but they're terrible because you got to understand how difficult their job is, right? They take a good business to market. If they take a good, decent business to market, they're going to get hundreds, 500 plus inquiries. They got to figure out who's serious and who's not. Are they going to be able to call all of those people back, return your voicemail super quick, fast? Absolutely not. This is not realistic. Emails, inquiries, they cannot go out to all of those people. And then I made the mistake having dinner with a business broker a few months ago going, I don't get it. What's the big deal? If a business falls out, there are plenty of buyers who will swoop in and take that good business, right? And his response was really impactful. He said, well, no, because that seller is going to feel a lot of irritation and they're going to lose trust with me. And if that happens, we may not be going back to market. And even if he does, he may not be going back to market with me. And if you put me in a position where, and it was actually in reference to something that was popular in SMB Twitter about somebody who had walked away from a deal for, a specific reason. And, there was a lot of conversation about it walking away from a deal with it, because of information that you knew before closing and whether or not that was appropriate. And the broker had very strong feelings about it. We were on opposite sides of this. He was saying, hey, we put 700 hours into a transaction by the time we get to closing. You can't just walk away a week before closing due to information that you knew before you signed the LOI. That's just not an acceptable way to do business, and it will get you ostracized from the broker community. And so anyways, the point is, if you walk a mile in that broker's shoes, you'll put yourself in a position to be able to sell to them. You understand their incentives, you understand their concerns, and then you can pitch yourself appropriately. So I think that's really good advice, Bruce, and it kind of ties the whole thing together.
And I'd add also just a couple of quick points as well. It's important in what we do every day in our lives, how we separate ourselves from the pack, right? If somebody comes to me, Bruce, why are you different than the next lender? Or if they come to you, Kevin, why you at SMB are different than the next law group, right? I always try to coach my potential borrowers and talk about when they are making that sales pitch to the broker or the seller, how are you differentiating yourself? What are you doing that's going to make a lasting impression on them? Mm-hmm. And it's not your personal financial statement. It's just not.
I mean, unless it's a whopper, right? Unless it's a really juicy
unless
one.
It's mind blowing. How does someone? I've been seeing a lot of.
I'd love to see your personal financial statement, Bruce, while we're on the topic here, but we'll do that off air.
Can you pull that up on the screen? I've been seeing a lot of commentary of really young searchers closing deals, and to your point of it's not the strong personal financial statement. Mm-hmm. I agree 100%, but there's always got to be something else as well, right? And sometimes it's a no-brainer. Sometimes it's a supply chain based business. This person has an MBA in supply chain from Harvard. They've been doing it for 25 years. They're in their 40s or 50s or whatever. Like, no brainer. I mean, the person as qualified could be.
Right.
But flip that to a 26-year-old searcher who has an undergrad in English literature, just finished their MBA last year, and has 2 years of work experience as a consultant at BCG, right? They don't have the wealth. They're going to have to go out and raise capital. They've never done commercial landscaping before, but they show up on your doorstep with a $5.5 million commercial landscaping deal. How do you analyze the searcher and what goes into? They don't have the personal financial statement. They don't have the work experience, but I'm still going to take a shot with this searcher. Like, what goes into that analysis?
Yeah. So the questions that I ask that are very meaningful to me is, why is the seller selling?
Okay.
I want to know why the seller is selling. I then want to know about the seller. I want to know 3 specific questions, and I ask.
And sorry to interrupt. When you say you're talking about as a banker, not as a searcher.
As a banker.
Someone brings this deal to you as a banker.
I thought that was your question. You want to know how
I think that
it is. I just want to clarify for listeners.
But the interests are aligned, right? I mean, the bank is taking a big risk on the business.
Yes.
And so whether you're buying it or you're lending on, I mean, I think that
the
concerns are the same.
That's
so
right.
It'd be interesting.
Sure. Yeah. So the 3 questions I always ask my potential borrowers to find out is, when did the seller take his last vacation? Where did he go, and for how long? Those are 3 extremely important questions, because if a searcher says, yeah, the guy lives in San Diego and he went down to LA for the weekend, but checked up on everybody while he did, that's a me business. And you're not going to be able to replace anybody in a me business. So that's a deal that I'm going to advise them, hey, that's going to be a tough deal to make for you, in my opinion, right?
Sure.
Then I'm going to get very granular on this, Kevin. Tell me what the day-to-day responsibilities of the seller looks like. What's his day look like? What's he do during the day? What skill sets does he have that you'll need to have to replace him? Can you replace him? How long will it take, do you think, to replace him? I mean, because as I call it, the 3 G's of a good deal: lending to good people, buying good businesses with good, strong cash flow.
You stole that from me, Bruce. That's misappropriation. I'm kidding.
right? So you have to know that this person that you're lending to is the right guy or woman to lend to, right? It's the right person to lend to. And the only way you can figure that out is what experiences do they have and what experiences do they need to have to be successful in replacing the seller.
And if you get the sense that they're putting themselves in a position, if it's that young searcher, and surrounding themselves with the people to give them the experience to be successful, you're willing to take a bet on that searcher, even if they don't already have that experience.
It depends, if there is a secondary tier of management that is there for them.
Yeah.
The worst thing, and I've said this many times, by the way, the worst thing that you could do as a person buying a business is buy a business and then your staff come to you, ask you questions, and you can't answer them.
Yeah. That's a great point.
It is a really good point.
That is going to be very difficult.
That's a great point.
So that's where I start, Kevin. So for me, this is not about me. I am very fortunate that where I am in life, I love doing what it is that I do. That's why I do it. I don't have to do it anymore. It's different when you get up in the morning and come to work because you want to, not because you have to. And so when I look at a transaction, I don't look at it like, oh my God, I've got to get this deal. I've got to do this deal. I've got to get this deal in. I need another deal. I don't. I'm putting the searcher first. I'm putting that business first. I'm putting that client first. And if I don't think it's
but you're also sneakily competitive, Bruce. I mean, let's
aiming to move up
as
the
you
league
always
table.
once
Let's be
told me,
honest.
as you have very well informed me, you're not going to win them all. You just have to win enough. And I bought into that philosophy, Eric. Thank you for sharing that with me, by the way. All the credit for you.
It's good sales advice I learned.
That's why Eric's never been to the Olympics. Okay, Bruce. All right.
This is advice that I learned as a small child selling pretend fundraiser candy bars outside of the local stadium to pay rent. That, you're not going to, not everybody's, you just got to get enough,
You just got enough. On. That's right.
I'm kidding.
That's right. But I think that as you work in this and realize you can't do every deal, you're only one person. You're not going to do every deal. You just want to make sure they're the right deal. And you're doing it for the right reason and you're lending it to the right people.
I want to drill down on this, Bruce, because I think I'm having a moment of an interesting revelation, which is the lender's perspective, same as the investors, is much more interesting to me than the buyers. Because not only are you saying, is this a good business, but you're also having to say, is this the right buyer for this business? So is this a good transaction? Is this a good transaction overall? Whereas the buyer, they may not necessarily have that level of self-awareness, and all they're looking at is saying, is this a good business? Because of course I can operate it if it's a good business, right? Where I don't think that enough people are having that level of self-reflection. So let's dig into that and see if we can give some people some really concrete value. And let's start with the business, and then let's talk about the buyer, and then let's talk about the relationship between the two. What, in your opinion, are the most important qualities of a great business? I know you talked about the seller and their vacations and how much they're in the business. What are the core elements of a great business in your opinion?
So number one for me, above anything else, Eric, is sustainability. Is the business sustainable? Is it going to be here arguably 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now? You're getting a 10-year SBA loan, right? So anything niche-y or anything like that is going to be very, very difficult. So when you drill down, it's to the basics.
You were a big fan of hand sanitizer import circa summer of 2021 is what you're telling me.
Masks. Bruce
and
invested
95 masks.
That's so great. Oh my God.
Show me those 7A loans.
Show me, yeah. So I start with, Why is this business in business? How do they make money? Why will they continue to make money? What's happening in the industry? What does the seller know that the buyer or I don't know? Sustainability. Drilling down deep into the business and the business model so that I know. I look at how long has the business been around? What changes have happened in the business?
And what are you looking at to make these evaluations, Bruce? What type of materials are you seeing? Is it the SIM? Is it something submitted by the buyer? What are you evaluating?
It generally starts with the SIM, right? Because the broker's doing a good job talking about the business, and they'll go give a history and say, this is when it's, who's owned it.
And for the audience's benefit,
we just got a loan approved today.
It means confidential information memorandum.
Today. We just got a loan approved today. The business being sold has been around for 102 years.
Wow.
That's you don't have to ask.
Is it a Catholic church?
I think I know what business you're talking about, Bruce.
I think you might, Kevin. I mean, you want to talk about sustainability. You want to talk about why they exist, how they've gone through changes, why they're positioned in the marketplace. I get really granular about that. I'll give you a perfect example very quick, not a knock on anybody, but if you called me up, Kevin, and said, hey, Bruce, I have a light manufacturing business that I'm interested in buying. And I said, okay, Kevin, what do they manufacture? And you said kayaks. For me, the answer would be no. Let me see if I can refer you to a couple of SBA lenders. And the conversation would be over in 6 seconds.
Why are you so hostile to kayaks, Bruce? I feel like that's something happened with the kayak.
Do you hate sports, Bruce?
something with an ex-girlfriend and a kayak.
How well do you know me? Well do you know me?
Apparently we have more to learn.
I'm picturing Bruce in a Speedo with a kayak. Was there a Speedo involved, Bruce? I'm kidding.
I'm editing this out, Eric. That is not an appropriate comment.
Fair enough.
If I get up, you only can see the top. But wait till you see the bottom.
Are you wearing a Speedo right now, Bruce?
Exactly.
Do not stand. This is a family show, Bruce. Do not stand up.
I do not need an explicit marking.
Oh my God. Oh my God. But to be truthful, that is exactly would be my comment. Why? Because it's a want business. Nobody needs a kayak to live.
Yeah.
Right. It's a discretionary purchase. It's just not something in my mind where that is a sustainable business model. I could be 100% wrong, but that's my right. And as I always tell my clients, it's my decision. I make the decisions because if I don't like it, it never goes forward, right? So every time you're talking with the lender, you find out, well, what is your bank like? Well, it's really what the lender likes, not really so much the bank, right? For a new lender,
sustainability, longevity.
Why are they in business? How do they make their money?
It needs to be essential. It sounds like you're saying it needs to be essential.
Yep. It's got to be, I like need type businesses. I like businesses that I know are going to be around. Like you wouldn't have wanted to make that bet towards the end of the Blockbuster era going, yeah, I'll finance your VCR store, right? I mean, just not a sustainable model, right? Just really not sustainable with new technology.
For our millennial listeners, a VCR is a device that you...
Well,
oh, that's so awesome, Kev.
And then tell us some bad attributes and then give us some examples, Bruce. What's a business that when you see it come across your desk, you're like, heck yeah, we've got a commercial roofing business. These are my favorite. As long as it's the right guy, it's a slam dunk.
Yeah, and and you are right. Commercial roofing, I love it. I love commercial roofing. I've done a number of commercial roofing transactions. I'm potentially in a couple right now. Super sustainable. Why? If your roof has a leak, it doesn't make a difference whether you want to fix it or you don't. You have to.
And do you look at something like, sorry to interrupt because I do want to circle back to Eric's question. It's a good one for some examples, but something like commercial roofing, are you always viewing these businesses through the 10-year 7A loan maturity lens because right now, right, something that's touching commercial real estate is probably not that interesting to a lot of people. But over 10 years, it's probably a reasonably safe bet.
Yeah.
It just has to factor into the financial analysis of how to ride, this dip in interest in commercial real estate at the moment. Do you fear for paradigm shifts like remote work and things like that when you look at something like commercial roofing that maybe 10 years ago felt much more stable than it does in 2023?
I mean, commercial roofing deals that I'm looking at, the numbers are just on an upward trajectory. They're not down.
By the way, I got completely lucky with that. I just threw commercial roofing out there. I had no idea that happened to be.
No, it's great, but it's a perfect example. And to your point, Kevin, those are great questions, and those are risks that you have to look at, and what we do talk about with the searcher. I remember this is a story. It resonates with me because it's how my mind thinks. When you have experiences, you look back. But I remember many years ago, this young gentleman came to me and he wanted to buy basically an auto repair business. So they did auto repair, and it was in Bethesda, Maryland, and it was on a phenomenal location. I just remember it was where two highways intersected, and it was this beautiful V. And we approved the transaction, and I said to him, okay, you need a lease for 10 years to match the length of the loan in this particular situation because the location is conducive to the success of the business. So the SBA always suggests a 10-year lease, but it's not required, by the way. But in this particular case, where the location was conducive to the success, I said, we need a 10-year lease. So moving forward towards closing, finally says to me, oh, well, we're meeting with the landlord next Friday, going to talk to him about renewing, and getting a 10-year lease. When the seller went with the new buyer and they talked about getting an extension for the lease because the lease actually was coming up in 6 months, the landlord informed the seller that he was not renewing the lease for him, and he would not be giving this buyer a new lease, that he was selling the property and they were converting it into condos.
Ouch.
In one swift moment, the seller lost his liquidity event because now he had nothing to sell.
Oof.
So
Ouch.
it was $1 million for a purchase price. And in an instant, the seller realized, I have nothing to sell. I just lost that liquidity. Right. And it's stories like that really, and they're true and they resonate with de-risking a transaction. So for me, when Eric asked that question about starting with the business and then start looking at the borrower and who we're lending to and are they the right one, the more you de-risk the deal, obviously the better it is. But I look at that as my responsibility when I'm talking with a searcher or a prospect to try to give them the best advice to do that and to de-risk that deal as much as possible to make sure that, to your point, we're both a lender and a partner and the investors and the seller. I mean, there's a lot riding and there's a lot pulling on those purse strings of that business. And we have a great time doing it, but it's serious stuff at the end of the day.
For sure. Along the same vein, I'm curious, sorry to put you on the spot with an example, but is there an example, Bruce, where you've passed on a deal, you thought it was a bad idea, you passed, and in retrospect, you're just smacking yourself in the face because it was just a runaway success? In this space, I'm not talking about like, I thought of investing in Apple in 1988, right? But in the small business space, I'm curious.
It's a great question. I don't know if I can answer it because generally I don't hear about a transaction.
You don't see the follow.
Yeah,
he's like, I don't miss, baby. I don't miss. Are you kidding me?
Well, I'm sure.
Your upside is your upside is, hey, we get paid back, we make a nice little return, and we move on. Your downside is the problem, right? So you'd rather pass on a good deal than have a few bad apples in the bunch, because I would suspect that and I know you've got the SBA guarantee, but it still mucks up your statistics and whatever else. I'm sure it's not a good thing. Is that right?
Kev, yeah, let me share a story with you. So several years ago,
I came here for war stories.
Yes,
so.
this is a war. So
Yeah, we're
several
going
years
to
ago-
talk promissory notes next. So warm
Okay.
up there, Bruce. Yep.
Okay, good. Several years ago, this searcher called me up and said, I have found a business to purchase. It was in California. I don't want to say where in California, but it's in California. And I said, okay. He said, the numbers look really strong, Bruce. The last 3 years, it did 800,000, it did 900,000, and it did $1 million in EBITDA. I said, okay. He said, it's a $5 million purchase price. So it's a 5 times multiple, but think back several years ago when interest rates were lower,
Yep.
5 times multiples deals were getting done, right? Because you had much, much lower interest rates.
Quick sidebar, Bruce. What are you seeing right now? What is the average multiple on a Bruce Marks size deal at the moment?
Realistically, 3.25 to 4-ish is the majority of what I'm seeing.
3 to 4, 3.25 to
Yep.
4. Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Please proceed. Yep.
So I said, okay, it's growing off nice castle. Tell me a little bit about the business. And he says, they install Christmas tree lighting. I said, okay. I said, seasonal business, I guess. And he kind of chuckled and he said, yeah. He said, they typically start, end of October, beginning of November. Christmas tree lights are up, obviously through Christmas. And then by the end of January, they're typically down. I said, so, nice model, 4 months, he's making $1 million. That's pretty good. I said, like I said before, tell me a little bit about the seller. He said, well, the seller is a guy who's 42 years old and his wife's 38. You've got 2 young kids. Why is he selling? He's tired. And I went, tired of what? Making $1 million.
Making $1 million.
Right. So right then and there, the radar goes up. He says, well, he's got some different business ventures and he's interested in putting his energy in these new business ventures. I said, but is he out on the houses installing the Christmas tree lighting? He says, no. I said, then what is he tired from? And then I said, well, I'll tell you what, let him pay me the $250,000 for the 4 months. I'll come out, I'll manage the business. He doesn't have to work a day. So he can't be tired anymore. And he'll still put $750,000 in his pocket. Can I have a conversation with him? He says, you're being facetious. I said, absolutely, I'm being facetious.
He's like, you're being a smart ass, Bruce.
Right, I'm being a smart
yes.
I used a nicer word. Right, okay. But that's a deal I would never do, Kevin. That's a deal that I absolutely 100% passed on. Now, did that deal get done? Maybe. And maybe it was a home run. But that's, to answer your question, I wanted to, in fairness, tell you, that's not a business I would ever lend to. Yeah. Seasonal. You miss one season or some of those wildfires that they have in California, whatever the case may be, you're up the creek without a paddle, without a kayak even, right? So you're just the
should have bought a kayak business.
Well, it's a salient point though, Bruce, because I hear this all the time where buyers want to explain away risks and go, no, but it's going to be fine. And my feeling on that type of thing is, I think, similar to yours, which is, yes, 99% of the time, it may be fine. But that 1% of the time that it is not fine is going to be catastrophic for you. So when you're evaluating risk, you have to say, what is the likelihood? And then you have to weigh that against the magnitude of the risk. And if it's a low likelihood with a very high magnitude risk, meaning it probably won't happen, but if it does, you're screwed. You probably should move on and find a new business, right? There's going to be risks in any acquisition. There's risks in any business. Every business has concentration issues and everything. We have risks in our business, but the idea is choosing the right risks and then figuring out how to mitigate those. I don't know that I would buy a seasonal Christmas light business from somebody who's 42 either. Although I will say this, I'm 36 and I'm pretty tired. And Kevin, you're what? You're 40 and you don't even have to answer that, Kevin. I can see you on the webcam here. So we're pretty tired. So that does, I appreciate what he's saying, but you make a good point, Bruce.
But you know what? I don't know that Bruce would finance the acquisition of our law firm. So I guess the
well, because the me part of it is I couldn't replace Kevin Henderson, Eric. So
I wouldn't buy
Eric,
our
no
law
problem.
firm. I wouldn't buy our law firm. I wouldn't buy any law firm, right? Because even though I feel like, hey, I've got some
For
marketing
the record,
chops,
Eric means at any time prior to January 1st, 2024, after which you should absolutely buy our law firm.
what happens in January 2024?
I'm just saying, I don't want someone a year from now listening to this episode thinking, hey, you said
Sure, dude,
this is a
stepping-
terrible-
No, I mean, listen, at the status quo, and the status quo of the vast majority of professional services businesses are that they are incredibly personal goodwill, relationship oriented. The work is project based,
Mhm.
right? Which is another big strike. And it's personality driven. The marketplace, I think, not to take us down an SMB Law Group hole, but the marketplace is becoming a lot more accepting of content creator led businesses. And there are private equity firms that specialize in acquiring those businesses because they realize the superpower that comes along with the 20,000 Bruce Marks followers in the War Story Saturdays and how much that 10x is your ability in business. And they get that. But then you got to wrangle the content creator and you've got to make sure that you can actually hand. So the day will come, assuming ethics permit it and whatever else, then I think we'll have a business that is hopefully saleable. Today is definitively not that day. So, yeah. So we're going to be installing Christmas lights for the foreseeable future, Kevin, to round that out.
That may be.
So that was the fourth part of your question, right, Eric? I mean, talking about
Yes, the second part is the person, right? Because the buyer is looking at the business. You're looking at the business and the buyer. Talk to us about, is it as simple as, hey, does this person have transferable skills that, lead me to believe that they can handle this? Or is it deeper than that?
Yeah. So it's definitely deeper than that, right? It's going into, and I make them answer those questions in writing. I've got a series of 8 or 9 questions about why they believe they're the right guy to buy the business, right?
What are those questions?
Well, what skill sets does the current seller have that you need? Oh, he's a master electrician. I'm not. Okay. If he's a small shop and he's doing a lot of the work and he's representing part of that income, well, you can't replace that because you don't have a master's electrician license. You don't, right? So, and I'm not saying I haven't done those kind of deals. I have, but it depends upon what's the support behind that. That's just for one example. If you're buying an architectural engineering firm, and again, it's that question of if you're the new owner and your employees come to you and they ask you questions and you can't answer them. What does that look like? You don't know what you don't know.
But that's the qualitative piece, right? That's the judgment call piece. Have you ever had an experience, Bruce, where the person, because there's this theory that in business, oftentimes we will get ourselves promoted until we promote ourselves over our head, if that makes sense. The average person ends up working a job that they frankly are not qualified for and should have stopped one level below, right? Mm-hmm. Is there ever an instance where you look at somebody and you go, yes, this is a tree trimming business. Yes, you've worked in tree trimming for 15 years. Heck, you may have even worked within the business you're trying to buy, but I just look at you and I go, this dude can't hack it. Like, this dude's just not cut out for this. You ever make those type of judgment calls?
Yeah, absolutely. Because let's say you're working in that business for 15 years and you were the one doing the tree trimming and you're the one out there knowing the customers, but you don't know anything about the financial aspects of that business. You don't know how they purchase supplies. It's like the person coming in saying, I want to buy a restaurant. Why? I like to eat. Well, everybody likes to eat. That doesn't mean you should own a restaurant, right? Like, you don't know how to buy, you don't know whether the food is perishable, how long, what you have to do for the vegetable, all the things that go into running a restaurant. But
are you telling me you won't finance our acquisition of a pizza parlor?
I was just going to make that comment, Kevin.
Well,
I was just going to make. And I felt like he was. I felt like he was subtweeting me there. I felt like he was attacking me, and you solidified. So, Bruce, I don't appreciate that. We will be sending our Domino's pizza. Well, sorry,
I didn't know this. I didn't know this was a setup. This
is breaking. This is hot off the pizza oven here, to use a pizza pun. But I got a pizza sponsorship. And I'm going to be going out with some sponsored pizza content today.
That's awesome.
Is it good pizza?
It's so I won't say too much.
It's a sponsored content.
It's
so this
not.
Is a loaded
it's not a pizza place. It's a pizza ancillary business. So
okay,
it is a pizza service provider, if you will.
Wow.
And I'm pretty excited about that. I know. I feel like I pulled off a miracle because an average man such as myself, pulling such an extraordinary feat as receiving a pizza sponsorship. Really, I'm about to shut down the podcast, the law firm. I mean, this is.
Well, that's big dollars.
This may be
Bruce,
the
it
last.
turns out I'm in search of a new co-host. If you're interested,
this may be the last SMB content that I do. So
the reason for this podcast was interviewing me to see if I could become a host. Now I get it. Okay,
we need to have Bruce back once in a while to guest host because you're awesome, Bruce. Actually, let's talk about your book a little bit. I want to hear about the book because your writing ability is fantastic. And for those of you who don't know, Bruce runs a War Story Saturdays, where he tells really pointed stories from the trenches of helping people buy businesses. One of which is the story of the promissory note. And we'll get to the book in just a second, but one of your most prolific tweets ever was the story of the promissory note, the seller who did not offer a promissory note. And it ended as badly as an acquisition could conceivably end. Tell us for those that haven't read the story, give us just the highlights of what happened there.
Yeah.
Should we issue a trigger warning here?
Yeah, we should because it's a story that has as sad of an ending as conceivably possible. So
I chuckle uncomfortably, but yeah, the story does involve suicide. So
just for anybody who's
and I never said that in the story, but it's that
sure.
So look at when in this particular story, business, quote unquote, the business loan was made based upon transferable skills that we just talked about, Eric. Bought the business. The seller did not take a note. When the loan closed, the seller said to the buyer, deal fatigue has set in. It's taken a while to get to the closing table. I'm going to take a couple of weeks vacation and then I'll come back and help you transition the business. A couple of weeks went by. The buyer reached out to the seller, asked him if he was coming in on Monday. The seller said he needed one more week and that he'd be in the following week. That week went by. The buyer reached back out to the seller, wasn't able to get in touch with him. Cell phone was disconnected. All types of communication were lost. And ultimately, 4 months into the business failed. The person had signed a personal guarantee. He had pledged his house. He had put in the majority of his money. So he lost his investment. While the business was going down, he lost his post-closing liquidity. His marriage was in trouble as a result of it. You can imagine the strain that causes. And ultimately, because he had pledged his house as collateral and there was a decent amount of equity, the bank had notified them that they were obviously going after the house. And it was too much for the buyer, and he ultimately committed suicide. And, it's stories like those. Again, in all fairness, I did not make this loan. It was somebody that I worked with who did. But in this, I didn't mention in the war story because there's only so much that you can mention. I was literally in Chicago when the wife of the deceased owner called into the bank to talk about what had happened and why they couldn't have been reached. And it was as heart-wrenching. It's still very tough to even think about, to be transparent. It was the worst thing that you could, that you'd want to experience. And I would never want to experience that. And I think that, we learn from life's lessons. That's what we do. I say this all the time. Today, I'm the best at what it is I do, but tomorrow I'll be even better, because every day you learn. And the saying of, I wish I knew then what I know now, can never be, because you don't live it and you don't experience it and you don't know it and you can't know it as many times as people tell you. You think back in both, you, Kevin, and you, Eric, think back 5 or 6 years ago where you were, where you are today, how different that is. But what you know today versus what you knew 6 years ago. And then when you multiply that by 25 or 30 years, or been in this game doing what I've been doing for 37 years, there's a lot that you have to give back. And I hope that by sharing the stories, that it resonates with people and it gives them a perspective. It's always interesting to see that people ask me, well, what industry was it in? Or they try to get granular on the detail. It's not the details that matter.
Yeah, they're trying to prescribe it to make sure they can, make sure they don't follow that path, which I get, right? That's our natural tendency. We want to avoid the bear trap that the last guy lost his arm in, right? But it's a really important point, because business has real consequences. And I suspect we need to zoom out just a little bit so we don't horrify people. That's a very rare occurrence within business, extremely rare occurrence. But there's lives behind these loans and behind these acquisitions, and the objective is to improve it, right? And to do something different and unique, and get control of your time and put yourself in a better position to support your family. And when it goes the other direction, obviously we could see that has, pretty powerful implications. But your chief takeaway from that, if you had one, sounds like it's make sure that the seller always has really meaningful screws to them, so that they are in a position that the business suffers, that they have a reason, meaning financial, to come and save the business, right? To at least help you save the business.
You have a transition plan. I mean, we see it a lot of times where in a change of ownership, the seller says, okay, I want compensation of X. And so you're paying him. I would love to see it more like, at the end of the 3 months, if you have done exactly what I have needed to be done, and that has been specified out, then you get your money. Because it's performance based. It's like, to me.
Well, I'll remind you that wouldn't be SBA eligible, Bruce, but something similar.
No, I'm not saying a note paying like that. I'm saying if you in your transition plan. So
yes,
I buy a business,
some sort of. Or you're saying some sort of.
I'm going to pay you $10,000 a month for consulting for the first 3 months, right? So you're going to pay him $30,000 for the transition. I would love to see it structured. I'm going to pay you the $30,000, but you're going to get it at day 90.
Yeah.
Because you've performed and you've done what I've asked you to do. And it's the transition plan that then becomes executable. And then he's remunerated for what he's done. It's like a contractor, Eric, who does work. Maybe he gets a little bit up front, but he gets paid at the end of the job when the job is complete.
When it's done. Yeah. And I don't want to give away our negotiating positions or say too much, because, maybe somebody will listen to this someday, but there are really powerful ways to make sure that the seller is even more beholden than that, right? If the thing goes down the drain, to conceivably go after them for the entirety of the purchase price.
No, well, you don't even want to get there. But that's my point. You don't want to get there.
You don't want to get into the accident. That's right. You prevent it up front.
Sometimes it's like brushing your teeth. If you're doing a good job, you're not going to get cavities. You don't want to wait till the end and go, okay, well, I got a cavity now, I'll brush my teeth, right? So, it's just like, to me, it's just, when I talk about seller notes, or I talk about what the seller is going to do to help in that transition, if they're not a creditor in it, they've got no skin in the game left other than, hey, I've gotten my money. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, oh, well. That's the point of it. And the point is try to avoid that if you can.
Yeah, I'm not. Go ahead, Kev.
I was just going to say, and I think that's the takeaway, right? Because legally, there's no obligation for the seller to have any skin in the game after closing. And so in order to do that and protect against these types of scenarios, you have to be thoughtful about how you negotiate and structure the deal, whether that's a note, whether that's consulting and transition period or something. But to expect that you're going to take over this business, the seller's going to go sailing in the Caribbean, and when things are difficult 5 months down the road, you're going to pick up the phone and they're going to come running. That there's no obligation, and you've got to be thoughtful in structuring these deals to make sure that they have a reason to come run.
Will Smith, he has a good podcast called Acquiring Minds. He had somebody out recently, anonymous, because they're still in the trenches with an acquisition that may fail. And they're in their acquisition. The seller did not even attend the announcement. The seller got the check and just left the new buyer to go stand in front of those employees and announce that the business had been sold. And as you can imagine, the whole thing has been a debacle. And I think the acquirer's female, said at the end that there's she said she believes there's a 60% chance that she gets through it, but 40% chance that she doesn't. And I wanted to scream the whole time, like, how can you buy a business and allow the seller to even conceivably have the opportunity to walk away on day one? Because they'll board a boat for the Caribbean, dude, and they may not come back. So even if they're a good person that would otherwise do it gratuitously out of the kindness of their heart, dude, some of these sellers are 70 plus years old. They're exhausted. You think your 40-year-old was tired? Go talk to that 70-year-old SMB owner that just got a big check.
When Eric was a first-year associate working with me, he's told the story before, working with me at a prior law firm, he went on a vacation to Hawaii and legitimately almost did not come home.
People have emotional experiences, and you do not want to have a seller who gets a big check, takes a vacation. That's not who you want to be relying on. You want to know that they've got $500,000, $1 million, the whole purchase price sitting in the balance if they don't come and help you save that business. Otherwise, I wouldn't buy a business. I would not go and do it. I would not do it. I'd rather work a W-2 job than put myself in that position. But if you go out and you hire a lawyer, and this is not a plug for us, it's a plug for being smart in your transaction and hiring right advisors. Because if you go out and you're like, hey, I just need a purchase agreement. Doesn't need to be anything special. I need a $500 purchase agreement off the shelf. Those are the type of implications, and those are the type of blind spots that you're leaving open in the most important transaction of your life. And it's one thing when your deal's south of $1.5 million, right? And it's, home purchase level money, even though that's significant. It's a whole other thing when you're talking about personally guaranteeing $5 million of money. You may this thing blows up and you gotta go get a job to pay it back. You may never dig out of that hole. Right. So it's serious. The implications are serious. Let's pause there, Bruce, and one last, because we've been on for a long time now. Plug your book. Let's talk about your book and what you got going on, and anything else you want to plug.
No, so we The Keys to Authenticity. That's the name of the book, The Keys to Authenticity. It's several co-authors. The book is just 22 or 23 chapters written by several people about being authentic and stories that they can share with business folks. And it's a great read. It's co-authored with a guy named Jack Canfield, who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul. Probably what he's most famous for. And it's just,
I think I've heard of that.
Huh? You've heard of that?
I think I've heard of that.
Yeah. And so, got a great opportunity to participate in the book, and thrilled to have that opportunity. And
how do you know
share
Jack?
my story.
That's really impressive. Not to interrupt you, Bruce, but that's
fine. To share my story and, add a little bit of tidbits of wisdom to those that feel like spending $20 and reading a book. So,
I can't. I tried to buy a copy and you're sold out.
Yeah, I think it's back now. So I think it's back on Amazon. So I think they've replenished some, but that's a good thing, right? So
it's a great thing.
Yeah.
I think you're being too modest, Bruce.
But I told you guys, I don't like.
I think you need to plug everyone to go out and buy that book.
Yeah, heck yeah. I mean, that's
but that'd be like asking people on Twitter to follow me, Kevin, and I don't do that, right? So yeah. I never do.
Eric will do it for you. That's fine.
You should follow Bruce. My handle is SBA B Marks, right, on Twitter.
Yeah, at SBA.
Yeah.
On X, excuse me.
On X. And Bruce is one of the people that, if you're a content creator or just interested in business buying, like Bruce is stuck to substance, right? Whereas I've gone down crazy rabbit holes trying to keep up with the algorithm and just have fun with it, tweeting about the Barbie movie and whatever else. Bruce is nothing but SMB, war stories, and high quality content. And he's got over 20,000 followers. And there are very few people, my partner included, that can stick to substance and gain a following. It's hard. It's really hard to be, a source of knowledge and have people want to continue to read your stuff. So kudos to you. Kudos to both of you, actually, Kevin, because you do a great job of that as well. So awesome. So follow Bruce, buy his book. Kevin, I'll give you the final word.
I have no final words other than thank you, Bruce. It's been a pleasure, as it always is. Always good to catch up with you.
Thank you.
And appreciate you sharing some words of wisdom for the listeners. I think a lot of this has been invaluable for people.
Thank you.
So thanks for coming on.
I greatly appreciate you having me and look forward to next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mundane Millionaires. If you enjoyed what you heard in this episode, make sure to follow Mundane Millionaires wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. See you next time.